welcome back to my channel. So today I wanted to do a video on probably one of the first missing person cases that I ever read about. It's just so bizarre, like the facts around this case are just like, what? It's a story from the 1970s and it's from America, so this is a case that happened over there, but it's just such a weird story, so that's what we're going to be talking about today. Everything that I use on my face will again be listed in the description box below. I've already done my brows and primed my eyes just to save on time because the look I'm doing today is quite complicated. So just save on time, I've already done my brows and primed my eyes, and yeah, so we're just going to get straight into talking about this missing persons case. So today's case is about a man called Dan D.B. Cooper. This is the pseudonym of an unidentified man who hijacked a Boeing 727 in America. And this was between Portland and Seattle on the afternoon of November 24th, 1971. He purchased his airline ticket using the alias Dan Cooper. Because of news miscommunication, the alias DB Cooper came into play in the media, so that's why he's known as sort of like both names. I'm guessing back then you didn't need a passport because, like, I don't get how he could have used a fake name if he had a passport, or maybe he had a fake passport, I don't know. But he managed to get on this flight anyway under the name Dan Cooper, but no one knows if that's what he was actually called. That's just the name that he gave to the airline when he bought his ticket. He extorted $200,000 in ransom money, which in today's money would be equivalent to 1.26 million. So yeah, he got a lot of money from this hijacking, and he parachuted to an uncertain fate, so no one actually knows if he survived his parachute jump. He's not been seen since, basically. So we're going to get into the story of how that came about, what happened on the plane, and how he managed to escape. So on Thanksgiving Eve, which was November 24th, 1971, a middle-aged man carrying a black case approached the flight counter of Northwest Orient Airlines, and this was at Portland International Airport. He identified himself as Dan Cooper, but again we don't know if that was his actual name, or, you know, he didn't have a passport, I assume. It's still weird, but I don't know, it was in the 70s, so maybe he didn't need one back then. And he purchased a one-way ticket on flight 305, which was a half-an-hour flight from Portland to Seattle, so it was only a short haul flight, and he purchased a one-way ticket. He boarded the aircraft, which was a Boeing 727-100, for the trip north, and there's different accounts of which seat he was sat in, so some say it was 18E or 18C. There's another account that says 15D, so I don't know which actual seat he was in, but there's different accounts on that, so I'm not sure. He was in the rear of the passenger cabin, and he was a quiet man who appeared to be in his mid-40s, and he was wearing a business suit and with a black tie and a white shirt, so he looked smart. They didn't think there was anything like untoward going on. He just looked like a regular businessman, just like taking a flight for work. There is a like a composite sketch of what he looked like, so I will put the photo here. But there's no like actual photos of him anywhere, like an actual photograph, because obviously he's unidentified. No one knows his real name or where he came from. So there's just the sketch that I think the police drew from the witnesses on the flight. So he ordered a drink, which was a bourbon and soda, and he was just waiting for the flight to take off. So he ordered his drink while he was waiting. The flight was approximately 1/3 full, and it departed Portland on schedule at 2:50 Pacific Standard Time, so 10 to 3 in the afternoon. Shortly after takeoff, Cooper handed a note to Florence Schaefer, who was the flight attendant that was sat nearest to him in a jump seat which was attached to the aft stair door. So he passed her this note, and she just assumed that he was like giving her a phone number or something. I'm assuming that she's had like men do this before. She wasn't really interested, so she just put it straight into her bag. And he turned and said to her, quote, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb," end quote. The note was printed in neat all capital letters, so I assume because he didn't want like his handwriting traced or anything like that, so he just printed it in all capital letters. and it was with a felt tip pen, so he was doing that everything in his power to not get caught, basically. Its exact wording is unknown, so we don't know exactly what the note said, because he later took the note back. So he didn't leave the note with the aircrew, he took it with him when he dived off the plane. But Florence recalled that the note said that he had a bomb in his briefcase, basically, so there wasn't really anything much on the note except that he had a bomb. After she read the note, Cooper said that she should come and sit next to him, and she did, and then she quietly asked if she could see the bomb. So I think she just wanted like proof that he actually had a bomb and wasn't just, you know, trying to scare everyone. So he opened up his briefcase and she saw 8 red cylinders, quote, 4 on top of 4, end quote, and it was attached to wires that were coated with a red insulation, and it had a large cylindrical battery. After he closed the briefcase, after he'd shown it to Florence, shown the bomb, he stated his demands, which was $200,000 in, quote, negotiable American currency, end quote, and he wanted 4 parachutes and a fuel truck standing by in Seattle to refuel the plane when it arrived. Florence told Cooper's instructions to the pilot in the cockpit, and when she returned, Cooper had put on some dark sunglasses. So he was literally doing everything like to not get caught. He didn't want people to see what colour eyes he had or like any distinctive features about him, really. The pilot was William A. Scott, who formerly served the Army Air Forces during World War II. He contacted Seattle-Tacoma Airport, the air traffic control, and basically informed local and federal authorities from there. So he called air traffic control to tell them that basically there was a guy on the plane who was going to hijack it, what his demands were, and they told the police. The other 35 passengers that were on board were given false information, so they were just told that the flight landing would be delayed due to a minor technical difficulty, so they didn't let anyone on board know what was really happening. They just said that they'd be late landing due to a technical difficulty. Northwest Orient president, so this was the airline that they were flying with, the president, which was Donald Nyrop, I think I'm saying that right, he authorised payment of the ransom and ordered all employees to cooperate fully with his terms, everything that he wanted them to do. He basically was just putting their safety first and said, you know, whatever he wants you to do, just go along with it, don't argue. The aircraft circled Puget Sound for approximately 2 hours to allow the Seattle police to get everything that he wanted, so it allowed them sufficient time to get the parachutes and the ransom money as well. This also allowed time to mobilise emergency personnel, so police and I guess like paramedics, because I'm assuming they thought he might have hurt a hostage or something, so they were trying to get everyone together. They were trying to allow enough time to get everything that they needed. Another flight attendant on board, who was called Tina Mucklow, she recalled that Cooper appeared familiar with the local terrain. So when they were flying above Puget Sound, when they were flying around basically stalling for time, she said he remarked, quote, looks like Tacoma down there, end quote, as the aircraft flew above it. So he knew, like, from the sky that they were in a certain area, which, like, not many people I think would be able to do that. That seems a bit strange. Florence, the first flight attendant that was sat with Cooper, she described him as well-spoken and not at all consistent with, you know, the usual type of like people that would hijack a plane. So they assumed that someone that would do something like this would be like a hardened criminal, and he was nothing like that. He was polite and, you know, he wasn't like causing any trouble other than trying to hijack a plane. She said, quote, he wasn't nervous, end quote, so he didn't seem like worried at all about what he was doing. He kind of was, it was just like a run-of-the-mill thing for him. Tina told investigators, quote, he seemed rather nice, he was never cruel or nasty, he was thoughtful and calm all the time, end quote. He ordered a second bourbon and soda. He paid his drink tab and even attempted to give Tina the change. So he wasn't like being how they would expect him to be. He was like really thoughtful and polite, which is just like so weird. You're hijacking a plane and you're trying to give someone change like that. It just doesn't make sense to me. But anyway, FBI agents assembled the ransom money from several Seattle area banks. He had 10,000 unmarked $20 bills. Most had serial numbers beginning with the letter L. This indicated issuance by the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, and most were 1963A or 1969 series, and they made a microfilm photograph of each of the bills. So they basically took pictures of all the bills that they gave to Cooper and sort of noted the serial number and what year they were made and where the majority came from. Cooper rejected the military issued parachutes that they offered. So they offered him sort of military grade parachutes and he was like, nope, I want civilian ones. So they had to go to a local flight school and get parachutes from there because he refused to accept the military ones that they were going to give him. At 5:24 Pacific Standard Time, Cooper was informed that his demands had been met, so they got in touch with him and was like, yeah, we've got your money, we've got your parachutes, let's go. And at 5:39 p.m, the aircraft landed at Seattle-Tacoma Airport. So by the time they landed, it was more than an hour after sunset, and Cooper instructed the pilot, William Scott, to taxi the jet to an isolated, brightly lit area of the apron and closed each window shade in the cabin to deter police snipers. So he didn't want the police trying to shoot him from outside, so he shut all the airplane shades so they wouldn't be able to tell who was like a civilian and who was him. Northwest Orient Seattle operations manager Al Lee approached the aircraft in street clothes to avoid the possibility that Cooper might think he was the police, so he just went in his normal like day clothes, not his airline uniform. He delivered the cash filled bag and parachutes to Tina via the stairs. Once the delivery was completed, Cooper ordered all the passengers, Florence and senior flight attendant Alice Hancock, to leave the plane. So he kept Tina and the pilots, and I think there may have been someone else on there too, but everyone else he was like, off you go, don't need you anymore. During refueling, Cooper outlined his flight plan to the cockpit crew, a southeast course toward Mexico City at the minimum airspeed possible without stalling the plane, approximately 100 knots, which is about 150 miles per hour. And he wanted a maximum altitude of 10,000 feet. He further specified that the landing gear remained deployed in the takeoff/landing position and the wing flaps be lowered 15 degrees and that the cabin remained unpressurized. The co-pilot, which was William J. Ratajczak, who also formerly served for the US Air Force during the Korean War and the Vietnam War, he informed Cooper that the aircraft's range was limited to approximately 1,000 miles under the specified flight configuration, which meant that the second refueling would be necessary before entering Mexico City. Cooper and the crew discussed sort of where they were going to do that and his options, and they agreed on Reno, Nevada as the next refueling stop. With the plane's rear exit door open and the staircase still extended, Cooper directed the pilot to take off. Northwest's Home Office objected on grounds that it was unsafe to take off with the staircase deployed, but Cooper argued that it was safe and he was not going to argue any further. That's what's happening, we're going to take off with the staircase down, end of story. And he would lower it once that they were in the air. So he told them that it's safe to take off with this, I'll put it down when we're in the air. An FAA official requested a face-to-face meeting with Cooper aboard the plane, but that was denied. The refueling process was delayed because of a vapour lock in the fuel tanker truck's pumping mechanism. However, once refueling had been completed, the plane was able to take off. At approximately 7:40 p.m, the Boeing 727 took off with only 5 people on board, which was Cooper, the pilot William Scott, flight attendant Tina Mucklow, co-pilot William Ratajczak, and the flight engineer Harold E. Anderson. 2 F-106 fighter aircraft were scrambled from McCord Air Force Base and followed behind the airplane, one above it and one below, and they were out of Cooper's view. So they got these fighter planes, to follow where he was going, but made sure that he couldn't see that they were following him. A Lockheed T-33 trainer diverted from an unrelated Air National Guard mission also shadowed the plane, but it ran low on fuel and had to turn back near the Oregon-California state line. Overall, there were 5 planes that were in total trailing the hijacked plane. None of the pilots saw Cooper jump from the plane at any point, and they couldn't figure out a location as to where he could have jumped from or where he could have landed. So after takeoff, Cooper told Tina to join the rest of the crew in the cockpit and remain in there with the door shut. She followed the instructions, but before she went in, she turned around and saw him tie something around his waist. So I'm going to assume that this was the parachute. At approximately 8 p.m, a warning light flashed in the cockpit, indicating that the air stair apparatus had been activated. The crew's offer of assistance via the aircraft's intercom was curtly refused. The crew soon noticed a subjective change of air pressure, indicating that the door was open. At approximately 8:13 p.m, the aircraft's tail section sustained a sudden upward movement, significant enough to require trimming to bring the plane back to level flight. At approximately 10:15 p.m, the aircraft's air stair was still deployed when the pilot landed the 727 at Reno Airport. So they landed at 10:15 at night in Reno, and the stair was still down. FBI agents, state troopers, sheriff, everyone, Reno police, there was all sorts of law enforcement that surrounded the jet when it landed, as it had not yet been confirmed whether Cooper was still on the plane or not, even though they'd felt, you know, the tail go up. They didn't know if he'd just thrown something off to confuse them. They didn't know if he was still on the plane or not yet. So they boarded the plane and did a search, and an armed search, and they quickly confirmed that he wasn't there. So there's many FBI agents that think that he didn't actually survive his jump, so they think that he died before landing or after he landed, because it was such a high risk jump, and there's never been any remains that have been recovered. So there's been no body or anything. So even if he didn't survive, there's never been a body discovered anywhere, which you would think if he didn't survive there'd be a body somewhere, right? But there's never been any remains of him at all. The FBI maintained an active investigation for 45 years after the hijacking, despite a case file that has grown like 60 volumes, over 60 volumes, over that period of time. There's been no definitive conclusion as to what happened to Cooper or even who he is, so we still don't know who this guy really is, if that was his real name or if he just used a random name that he found somewhere. We don't know. Numerous theories of wildly varying possibilities have been proposed over the years by investigators, reporters, and just amateur enthusiasts, so people like me that like missing persons cases. A young boy discovered a small number of ransom bills along the banks of the Columbia River in February 1980, and that find triggered a renewed interest, but ultimately it only deepened the mystery, and the majority of the ransom remains unrecovered. So a lot of the money, or majority of the money should I say, is still missing. It hasn't been spent because they've obviously got the serial numbers. It's never been traced anywhere. They only found that small amount of money in the river in 1980 basically. FBI agents recovered 66 unidentified fingerprints aboard the plane. The agents also found Cooper's black clip-on tie, his tie clip, and 2 of the 4 parachutes, one of which had been opened and 2 suspension lines had been cut from its canopy. Authorities reviewed eyewitnesses in Portland, Seattle and Reno, and all of those that personally interacted with Cooper. Local police and FBI agents immediately began questioning more than 800 possible suspects, and all but 24 were eliminated from the investigation. So they narrowed it down to 24 people. An Oregon man named D.B. Cooper, who had a minor police record, was one of the first persons of interest in the case. He was contacted by Portland police on the off chance that the hijacker had actually used his real name, or maybe used the same alias in a previous crime. So maybe he'd done something before, obviously he had a police record, and he'd used that fake name with that too. So that was why they were contacting this guy, just on the off chance that he'd done something before and used the same name. He was quickly ruled out as a suspect, but a local reporter by the name of James Long, who was rushing to meet a deadline, confused the eliminated man's name with the pseudonym used by the hijacker. So this is why in the media and now even to this day he's known as DB Cooper, because this guy was in a rush and wanted to get this story out and he confused the names. A precise search area was difficult to define, as even small differences to the estimates of the aircraft's speed, the environmental conditions along the flight path, which varied significantly by location and altitude, changed Cooper's projected landing point significantly. So literally the smallest thing could have changed where he landed by like a long shot. So they had no idea really where to start looking. An important variable was the length of time that he remained in free fall before he pulled his parachute, if he succeeded in pulling it at all. Neither of the Air Force fighter pilots saw anything exit the airliner, either visually or on radar, and they didn't see a parachute open. But at night, with extremely limited visibility and cloud cover obscuring any ground lighting below, an airborne human figure who was wearing all black at the time could have easily gone unnoticed. The T-33 pilots never made visual contact with the hijacked plane at all. So it was only the fighter pilots that actually saw the plane, and they didn't see anything come out of the plane at all. But because it was dark and cloudy, it was kind of difficult that they would have seen anything anyway. In an experimental recreation, William Scott piloted the aircraft again and used the same flight conditions as was in the hijacked plane. The FBI agents on board who were doing the recreation, they pushed a 200-pound sled out of the air stair, and they were able to reproduce the upward motion of the tail section that was described by the air crew at 8:13 p.m. Based on this experiment, it was concluded that 8:13 p.m. was most likely the jump time. At that moment, the aircraft was flying through a heavy rainstorm over the Louise River in southwest Washington. Initial thoughts placed Cooper's landing zone within an area of the southernmost outreach of Mount St. Helens, a few miles southeast of Ariel, Washington, and near Lake Merwin, which was an artificial lake formed by a dam on the Louise River. Search efforts focused on Clark and Cowlitz counties, encompassing a terrain immediately south and north of the Louise River in southwest Washington. FBI agents and sheriff deputies from those counties searched large areas of the mountainous wilderness on foot and by helicopter. Door-to-door searches of local farmhouses were also carried out, and other search parties ran patrol boats along Lake Merwin and Yale Lake, the reservoir immediately to its east. No trace of Cooper or any of the equipment presumed to have left the aircraft with him was ever found. The FBI also coordinated an aerial search using fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters from the Oregon Army National Guard along the entire flight path, known as Victor 23 in standard aviation terminology, but Vector 23 in most Cooper literature. So when it's been written up about, they use Vector 23. And this was from Seattle to Reno. Although numerous broken treetops and several pieces of plastic and other objects resembling parachute canopies were sighted and investigated, nothing relevant to the hijacking was ever found. So they did find bits of debris, but they concluded that it wasn't from the hijacked plane. Shortly after the spring thaw in early 1972, teams of FBI agents aided by some 200 Army soldiers from Fort Lewis, along with Air Force personnel, National Guardsmen and civilian volunteers, conducted another thorough ground search of Clark and Cowlitz counties for 18 days in March and then an additional 18 days in April. Electronic Explorations Company, a marine salvage firm, used a submarine to search the 200-foot depths of Lake Merwin. Two local women stumbled upon a skeleton in an abandoned structure in Clark County, but it was unfortunately identified as the remains of a teenage girl who had been abducted and murdered several weeks before. Ultimately, the search and recovery operation, arguably the most extensive and intensive in US history, uncovered no significant material evidence related to the hijacking. A month after the hijacking, the FBI distributed lists of the ransom serial numbers to financial institutions, casinos, racetracks and other businesses that routinely conducted significant cash transactions, and to law enforcement agencies around the world. Northwest Orient offered a reward of 15% of the recovered money to a maximum of $25,000. This was in early 1972. The US Attorney General John N. Mitchell released the serial numbers to the general public. In 1972, two men used counterfeit $20 bills to swindle £30,000 from a Newsweek reporter, Carl Fleming, in exchange for an interview with a man they falsely claimed was the hijacker. So in 1972, these guys pretended that they knew who the hijacker was to try and get money, basically. Early 1973, with the ransom money still missing, the Oregon Journal republished the serial numbers and offered £1,000 to the first person to turn in a ransom bill to the newspaper or to any FBI field office. In Seattle, the Post-Intelligencer made a similar offer with a $5,000 reward. The offers remained in effect until Thanksgiving 1974, and though there were several near matches, no genuine bills were ever found. In 1975, Northwest Orient's insurer, the Global Indemnity Company, complied with an order from the Minnesota Supreme Court and paid the airlines $180,000 claim on the ransom money. Subsequent analysis indicated that the original landing zone estimate was inaccurate. William Scott, who was flying the aircraft manually because of Cooper's speed and altitude demands, later determined his flight path was significantly further east than they originally thought. Additional data from a variety of sources, in particular Continental Airlines pilot Tom Bowen, who was flying 4 minutes behind Flight 305, indicated the wind direction factored into drop zone calculations had been wrong, and possibly as much as 80 degrees. This and other data suggested that the actual drop zone was probably south-southeast of the original estimate in the drainage area of the Washougal River. On July 8, 2016, the FBI announced that it was suspending active investigation on the Cooper case, citing its need to focus its investigative resources and manpower on issues of higher and more urgent priority. Apparently, local field officers will continue to accept any legitimate physical evidence related specifically to the parachutes or the ransom money that may emerge in the future. So as of 2016, I'm assuming that that's still the case nowadays. The 60-volume case file compiled over the 45-year course of the investigation will be preserved for historical purposes at the FBI headquarters in Washington, DC. And on the FBI website, there is currently a 28-part packet full of evidence gathered over the years, and all of the evidence is open for the public to read. Some theories are that because Cooper appeared familiar with the Seattle area, that he may have been an Air Force veteran, based on testimony that he recognised the city of Tacoma from the air as the jet circled Puget Sound, and his accurate comment to Tina Mucklow, one of the flight attendants, that the McCord Air Force Base was approximately a 20-minute drive from the Seattle-Tacoma airport at the time, a detail that most civilians would not know or would not make a comment on, so they thought that was a bit strange that he knew that. His financial situation was likely very desperate. According to the FBI's retired chief investigator Ralph Himmelsbach, extortionists and other criminals who steal large amounts of money nearly always do because they need it urgently, otherwise the crime is not worth the considerable risk. Alternatively, Cooper may have been a thrill seeker who made the jump just to prove that it could be done. Evidence suggested that Cooper was knowledgeable about flying technique and the terrain. He demanded 4 parachutes to force the assumption that he might compel one or more hostages to jump with him, ensuring that he would not be deliberately supplied with a sabotaged parachute or sabotaged equipment. He chose a 727-100 aircraft because it was ideal for a bailout escape due to the stairs and the high placement of all 3 engines, which allowed a reasonably safe jump despite the proximity of the engine air exhaust. It had a single point fueling capability, a then recent innovation that allowed all tanks to be refueled rapidly through a single port. It had the ability, unusual for a commercial jet airliner, to remain in low altitude flight without stalling, and Cooper knew how to control its airspeed and altitude without entering the cockpit, where he could have been overpowered by the pilots. In addition, Cooper was familiar with important details such as the appropriate flap setting of 15 degrees, which was unique to that aircraft, and the typical refueling time. He knew that the air stair could be lowered during flight, and that was a fact that was never disclosed to civilian flight crews, since there was no situation on a passenger flight where that would make it necessary. He also knew how to work the stairs and where it could be operated from, and some of this knowledge was virtually unique to CIA paramilitary units. In addition to planning his escape, Cooper also retrieved the note and wore dark glasses, which indicated that he had a certain level of sophistication in avoiding things that aided the identification of the perpetrator of the best known case of ransom, the Lindbergh kidnapping. The FBI speculated from the beginning that Cooper did not survive his jump, saying, quote, "Diving into the wilderness without a plan, without the right equipment, in such terrible conditions, he probably never even got his chute open," end quote. Even if he did land safely, agents contended that survival in the mountainous terrain at the onset of winter would have been virtually impossible without an accomplice and at a predetermined landing point. This would have required a precisely timed jump and cooperation from the crew. There is no evidence that Cooper requested or received any help, and that he had any idea where he was when he jumped into the stormy, overcast darkness. The Cooper hijacking marked the beginning of the end for unscrutinised commercial airline travel. Despite the initiation of the Federal Sky Marshal Programme the previous year, 31 hijackings were committed in US airspace in 1972. 19 of them were for a specific purpose of extorting money, and most of the rest of the attempts were to reach Cuba. In 15 of the extortion cases, the hijackers also demanded parachutes. In early 1973, the FAA began requiring all airlines to search all passengers and their bags, amid multiple lawsuits saying that such searches violated the Fourth Amendment protections against search and seizure. Federal court ruled that it was only acceptable when applied universally and when limited to searches for weapons and explosives. Only 2 hijackings were attempted in 1972. Both of these were psychiatric patients, one of whom intended to crash the plane into the White House to kill President Nixon. In the wake of multiple copycat hijackings in 1972, the FAA required that all Boeing 727 aircraft could be fitted with a device, later called the Cooper vane. This prevents the lowering of the stairs during flight. As a direct result of the hijacking, the installation of peepholes was mandated in all cockpit doors, and this made it possible for the cockpit crew to observe people in the passenger cabin without having to open the door. So, wild, right? I don't know whether I think he survived or not. It feels weird that if he didn't survive, that there'd be no body anywhere. But also, if he did survive, where did he go? No one's ever seen him since, or that we know of. Obviously, we don't really know what he looks like, so that's just crazy. And the money has never been found or been spent, so he kind of took $200,000 and then did nothing with it, it seems. So it just seems so strange to me that him and the money just disappeared basically into thin air, and that no one saw him jump out. I mean, I know it was dark and cloudy, so the fact that no one saw him jump isn't that crazy, but there's been no body, there was no parachute found, the money's still not been found. Wild. But this was one of the first cases that I read about. But yeah, it's just so fascinating to me that he's not been found or identified, the money's just gone, vanished. Poof. So yeah, let me know what you think below. I don't know whether I think he survived it. It seems like he did, but then where did he go after that? And why steal that money if you can't spend it? Because I'm assuming he would have known that they would have tried to chase it. So yeah, that just seems so odd. But yeah, let me know what you think below. Next week, obviously, we'll be doing another missing persons case. They honestly get more and more mind-blowing as we go on. I've found some really good ones, so I'm really excited for that. So yeah, we'll see you next week for another missing persons case. Make sure if you like this video, you give me a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you next Monday. Bye.